Let's begin by returning to my most basic question about democratic socialism. What is democratic socialism? This question can be difficult to answer if you consider the remarks of many of the politicians who are pushing democratic socialism today, because they seem to be purposely vague. For example, democratic socialism, in the words of Bernie Sanders, is having in a civilized society the understanding that we can make sure that all of our people live in security and in dignity. Healthcare is a human right. All people should have healthcare. You can't get ahead in this country, in this world, unless you have a decent education. We have got to, as a right, end the kinds of discrimination, the racism, the sexism, and the homophobia that exist. So to me, when I talk about democratic socialism, what I talk about are human rights and economic rights. I think most Americans agree with much of what Sanders said, that we want all Americans to live in security and dignity, that we want Americans to have the opportunity to get a decent education, and that we do not want discrimination to exist in America. There may be disagreement over what should be included as human rights, since some of the human rights Bernie Sanders mentions infringe on the human rights of others. This is a disagreement over positive human rights, which are human rights that normally require others to do something for you to possess those human rights, and negative human rights, which mostly only require you to be left alone, and often that is being left alone from the government, for you to be able to take advantage of those human rights. The major issue is positive human rights infringe on our individual human right of liberty, since we are required to act to support what the government deems is a human right of others. And that is regardless of if we agree with their determination of the human right. I don't have time to get any deeper into this issue in this discussion, but regardless of where you fall on those types of issues, capitalists will argue that implementing democratic socialism is not required to work towards any of those goals. In addition, to make democratic socialism even more confusing, Bernie Sanders consistently points to the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, as examples of democratic socialism for America. The reason this causes more confusion is because the Scandinavian countries are not socialist. Socialism allows for a lot of government control in the economic markets, while capitalism allows for citizens to have the freedom to spend and invest their money as they see fit. If you look at the Heritage Foundation's rankings of economic freedom in 2020, Denmark was ranked as having the 8th freest economy in the world. The US was 17th, Sweden was 22nd, and Norway was 28th. Their economic markets all have roughly the same freedom as the US. Then what is the major difference between the Scandinavian countries and America? Essentially, today, they are just highly taxed welfare states that fund their welfare programs through the proceeds of capitalism. Is that what Bernie Sanders wants? Does he want a highly taxed welfare state that is supported by the proceeds of capitalism? If it is, he is not clearly saying that. However, I do not believe that is what he wants. And that is definitely not what the Democratic Socialists of America want. So what do they want? To begin, the Democratic Socialists of America believe that both the economy and society should be run democratically. Since Americans love democracy, at first, this does not sound too bad. However, remember my explanation of our representative democracy. This would mean we would get to vote for someone to represent our political and economic needs. How much influence would we really have as individuals on political, social, and economic outcomes? Consider any government agency like the Department of Energy or the Post Office, and consider how much direct influence we have on decisions made in those areas. In actuality, we would be surrendering our individual freedoms in many areas to the government. Nevertheless, if Americans do decide to move toward democratic socialism, how will our elected representatives advocate for us? The answer to that question will depend on the collective goals of democratic socialism in America. Since we would be giving so much power to the government to make decisions for us, I think it is fair for us to ask for a clear explanation of their collective goals and the means they intend to use for achieving their goal. These questions are even more important since political organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America reveal that they don't only want to make minor changes to the American society, but instead, in their own words, say, many structures of our government and economy must be radically transformed. What will their new, radically transformed society look like? And what means do they plan to use to radically transform our society? We can begin to discern what this new society will look like by reading their own words. This will give us a better understanding of their collective goals for this new society. And then we can begin to discern their means for radically transforming our society by looking at current examples. So what are the collective goals of the Democratic Socialists of America? Their goal is a socially and economically just society. At first thought, this may not seem too radical to you, but if that's the case, that's only because your idea of a just society is not in agreement with their just society, the one that they have in mind. The Democratic Socialists of America claim democratic socialists have long rejected the belief that the whole economy should be centrally planned. No central planning sounds good, but that's not a promise they can possibly keep. Why? Because their goal of a socially and economically just society is a collective goal. What I mean is that it is their goal for the whole country. How could they possibly have a collective goal for the whole country that is not centrally planned? They can't. And what would life really be like in their centrally planned collective society? First, what will their just society look like economically? The Democratic Socialists of America claim they will allow the free market to continue to operate for many consumer goods. But our democratically elected representatives will advocate for our economic needs in areas like large concentrations of capital in industries such as energy, steel, mass transit, and housing. This will also include education and medical care. At a more local level, for example, in the company where you work, there would be social ownership, which could take many forms, such as worker-owned cooperatives or publicly owned enterprises managed by workers and consumer representatives. That is to say, the company you work for would not be owned by an individual person. It would be owned by the society or by all the workers who are employed at the company. The workers would have the right to vote for the people in the company who represent them at the different levels within the company. And the workers would share the profits of the company. This means your boss may be decided by his popularity and not by his ability. Those shared company profits may not be too lucrative after all, especially when Frank wants to sleep during his entire shift at work. And what would happen if we didn't agree with the company's decisions? We could go on public welfare for a time while we decide what company we want to work for next. Unfortunately, the Democratic Socialists of America don't ever convincingly explain why we would want to get off of public welfare and go back to work in the first place. Instead, they claim that by giving the government more control of American economics, the result would be a just society where we are all equally free to live our lives in peace and security. Next, what will their just society look like socially? I'll quote the Democratic Socialists of America to explain what is important to them. They say, many Democratic Socialists actively work in the single-issue organizations that advocate for those reforms. We are visible in the reproductive freedom movement, the fight for student aid, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender organizations, anti-racist groups, and the labor movement. They continue by saying, it is precisely our socialist vision that informs and inspires our day-to-day activism for social justice. As socialists, we bring a sense of the interdependence of all struggles for justice. No single issue organization can truly challenge the capitalist system or adequately secure its particular demands. Then they say, in fact, unless we are all collectively working to win a world without oppression, each fight for reforms will be disconnected, maybe even self-defeating. Dinesh D'Souza also points out, at a recent meeting of the Democratic Socialists, there were activists calling themselves eco-socialists, Afro-socialists, Islamo-socialists, Chicano-socialists, sanctuary socialists, Me Too socialists, disability socialists, queer socialists, and transgender socialists. In addition, when you read their website, their magazine, listen to their speakers, and listen to their politicians, they never stop talking about how they want to radically transform our society. For example, to name a few areas where they want radical transformation: national priorities like the Green New Deal, expanded public housing and renters' rights, Medicare for all, labor, childcare, housing, decarceration, political education, open borders, demilitarization of the U.S.-Mexico border, abolition of agencies of immigration and customs enforcement and non-citizens border protection, decriminalization of immigration, a pathway to citizenship for all non-citizen residents, the full decriminalization of sex work, reparations, developing a comprehensive platform for African American descendants of slavery and Jim Crow from 1619 to 1965, forming national work groups to work on BDS, which is boycott, divestment, and sanctions, ending cash bail, police and prison abolition, anti-fascism, and their list go on and on and on. In summary, if the Democratic Socialists of America were to take full control in their economically just society, they state they would allow the free market to operate in minor areas like consumer goods, but our government representatives will make decisions for us in the major areas. In their socially just society, they would be taking identity politics to heights never seen, and they would be actively working to stop what they consider to be all forms of oppression in those areas. I pray all of this causes alarm bells to start going off in your head. I know it did for me. When I began my study of democratic socialism, I was hoping for something better. But this is what they say they want.